Let's turn our attention now to some main international news as we're learning more about the very near future. That's what the Israeli government is talking about, a potential invasion of Rafah. I do want to put up just this shot as well here on Live Now from Fox and give you a better understanding. This comes after the latest round of Gaza ceasefire talks ended in Cairo, Egypt, after, quote, in-depth and serious discussions, the Hamas militant group said Sunday. After signs of progress, the outlook appeared dim, though, as Israel closed its main crossing point for delivering badly needed humanitarian aid for Gaza. The defense minister claimed Hamas wasn't serious about a deal and warned, quote, a powerful operation in the very near future in Rafah and other places across all of Gaza. I do want to bring in right now into the conversation here on Live Now from Fox, national security analyst, friend of the program, Hal Kempfer. Thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. And it feels like we get closer and closer to Rafah, even though nothing has yet happened. Maybe how strong are those words, and what do we make of these latest developments, Hal?
Andy, there's so much momentum going into the Cairo talks. You know, Bill Burns, the CIA director, was there. You had certainly the Egyptian government was there in full force trying to get a deal put in place. Qatar was still very active in this thing, and there were other players from around the region that were still very active. So the Israelis were there, the Hamas delegation was there, and yesterday there were actually unnamed senior Egyptian officials who seemed to indicate that Hamas had accepted the deal. And now it's all unofficial, but that's kind of what they were. So let's just say that hopes were very high, and then today things just sort of fell apart. Hamas went back to its original position, which is a full Israeli withdrawal, and that eventually they returned to power, if you will, in the Gaza Strip. And then, of course, the Israeli government, Netanyahu, gave a rather impassioned speech talking about what Hamas wants and that is completely unacceptable. Sure. So we're right back to where we were before the Cairo negotiations really started. In fact, I think in some ways, because of the Cairo negotiations, we're back further. Now, I will say that the participants there, or at least some of the participants there, were expressing some degree of hope. You know, the talks continue, the negotiations continue. They're now supposed to move back to Qatar. But this is a huge setback, takes momentum, and of course, Rafah is right there, and Israel's making some very strong. There's some very strong words coming from a variety of Israeli officials, not the least of which Defense Minister Gallant, that Rafah is bordering, if not imminent, bordering on imminent.
Yeah, and when you say very near future, when you say imminent as well, is it just a matter of if these talks break down, they go with their plan, or is there planning needed to take place? And just based on that, what's the timeline potentially look like of an invasion of Rafah?
Well, first off, the U.S. and others would like to see a very robust evacuation operation of all the civilians there. The Israelis have done some work on this. Weeks back, there was a discussion of a tent city with 40,000 tents being erected, and each tent can hold approximately 10 to 12 people. That's a lot of tentage, if you will. Of course, the question is, what about sanitation, water, everything else going on in there? So it wasn't quite clear, and frankly, they'd have to evacuate over 1 million people that are in there, probably closer to close to 1.3, if you will. So there's a lot of people that have to go in there that would have to be able to do this, to make this happen, and it just doesn't appear to be ready. The issue that we're seeing with Rafah is somewhat rhetorical, but Benjamin Netanyahu has said that there was a week that basically Hamas had a week to kind of come to an agreement on this thing, or they were going to move, and it was all based on putting phenomenal pressure on the Cairo talks, and with those breaking down, now the situation is okay. So where does he go? And within the internal politics of Israel, he is somewhat almost obligated to follow through. The other side, too, is if the talks break down like this, and this gets into negotiation strategy and stuff, I'd said this on the air earlier that, or some days back, that the negotiation was, for Israel, was kind of like presenting a bad cop, worse cop, which is, okay, you don't like the deal. Here's the worst situation that will result if you don't take the deal, which is a military action in Rafah. And at this point, that's kind of what you're seeing, which is it's imminent, it's coming, it's going to hit real soon. And frankly, from a negotiation standpoint, you have to say things like that if you want Hamas to suddenly change their mind. Yeah. But I should mention that one of the challenges that Hamas has is there really is no way that they come out of this on top. There's no way they come out of it whole, if you will. They're going to come out of this as a demilitarized organization. They're not going to have any political power, if you will, or any political status for quite some time. And for Yahya Sinwar, it is very dubious that he's going to come out of this alive. In fact, reports are today that one of the things that they think he's been doing is surrounding himself with hostages. He's underground, literally underground in a tunnel. And there's a belief that he has surrounded himself with hostages, the Israeli hostages, and also, I should mention, Israeli-American hostages to protect him and his family. So that also adds to the impetus for the IDF to figure out a way to go in there and get him, because they realize he's not going to come out on his own if he's taking those kinds of precautions. So yeah. It's really, I have to say, it's very interesting. By the way, you mentioned, I hate to go on, but I should mention, you mentioned, of course, they're saying, the aid was blocked. Hamas, the military, the Al-Qassam Brigade, the military wing of Hamas, fired on one of the main checkpoints. And so when they say the aid has blocked, there's a lot of discussion right now that Israel is not letting in enough aid. But if Hamas is firing on a checkpoint, you literally can't move aid through a checkpoint that's under fire. It doesn't work. So it's not just, they're pointing fingers at Israel, but they were also dropping rounds on the checkpoint that brings that aid in. So.
Yeah, like you said, there's just so many different facets in this, and Israel really has to be serious and show the seriousness of these talks, or it could go from bad to worse. I do want to keep you here on our air, Hal. I want to play some sound from Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. He spoke earlier today at a Holocaust remembrance, and I want to ask you a question after this. Let's just listen into this about minute soundbite here from Netanyahu.
80 years ago, in the Holocaust, the Jewish people were totally defenseless against those who sought our destruction. No nation came to our aid. Today, we again confront enemies bent on our destruction. I say to the leaders of the world, no amount of pressure, no decision by any international forum will stop Israel from defending itself. As the Prime Minister of Israel, the one and only Jewish state, I pledge here today from Jerusalem on this Holocaust Remembrance Day, if Israel is forced to stand alone, Israel will stand alone. But we know we're not alone, because countless decent people around the world support our just cause. And I say to you, we will defeat our genocidal enemies. Never again is now.
All right, you're just listening in. There was Benjamin Netanyahu. Hal, I'm going to bring you into the conversation again, because as we approach the 7-month mark since October the 7th, of course, October the 7th, very significant for the community there in Israel as well. As we head into the Holocaust remembrance, the days of remembrance to remember those just very grim memories dating back several decades ago, is there anything symbolic about a potential invasion of Rafah around this week? Is that something that Israel and Netanyahu are considering right now?
Symbolism is something that is very much in the planners' minds, and certainly very much the minds of Netanyahu and his cabinet, is that here they are on the anniversary of the Holocaust, and they're looking at this. The thing to remember about October 7th, it was the biggest, if you will, mass homicide of Jews since the Holocaust, and that's been brought up many times. Just the scope, of the attack, the nature of the attack, the nature of what was done, the inhumanity that reminds everyone of the inhumanity of the Nazis, what they inflicted on the Jews during World War II, during the Holocaust. That was all revisited after October 7th, and that is very much. I don't know if the rest of the world really understands that, but it's certainly scarred on the minds of every Israeli and certainly Jews around the world of the horrific nature of the October 7th attack. So this is the anniversary of the Holocaust, and certainly the defense. That's one of the reasons that Israel exists. That if you go back to the end of World War II, the reason Israel is there is to give a homeland, a nation-state homeland for the Jews, something they had lacked or not had for, well, since the 1st century AD. And obviously to put it in the historical homeland of the Jews, which is Israel, and also to provide, since then, have constantly been providing not just defense of the borders of Israel, but defense of Jews around the world. And that's something that is seen with Israeli actions going back for decades and decades and decades, is that they will go back and take very concerted action to defend Israel and to defend Jews worldwide. Sometimes it's political, diplomatic. Sometimes it's paramilitary, covert action, whatever's necessary. And of course, one of the most famous things was when the Palestinian terrorists attacked the 76 Olympics in Munich. Israel, rather famously, ironically, one of the more famous covert programs, if I can put those words together, went after the Black September group all over Europe and elsewhere, and the Middle East, to make it very clear that if you do something like that anywhere in the world, that Israel will come after you, that retribution will happen. So in saying this is still a continuation of what happened on October 7th. This is a retribution. This is eliminating the threat that's occurred. So it's substantive symbolism, if you will, but there's a lot of substance. It's more than just symbolic.
Yeah, in a historical context, not lost on everyone as they remember all of those lives lost, the October 7th attack, the deadliest since the Holocaust. All right, I just wanted to ask you that, but let's continue on because there's several other facets we want to get into, Hal, and most notably also about as Israel ordered local offices of Al Jazeera, the news organization there, to close on Sunday. It's an extraordinary order confiscating broadcast equipment, preventing the broadcast of the channel's reports, blocking the website as well. What do we make of this? What goes into some of these decisions, and what's kind of your reaction to it?
Well, Al Jazeera, of course, if you go back to the beginning of the U.S. Action after 9/11, and actually going back before the U.S. action in Iraq, that Al Jazeera is this kind of this, some would call it like the Arab CNN, if you will. It's based in Qatar, and that's where a lot of the negotiations for hostage release and ceasefire have been very active. Hamas also has offices, and that's been very much controversial. They have offices in Qatar. That's their main overseas diplomatic wing, if you will, is in that country, and of course that's where Al Jazeera is based. Now, I occasionally watch Al Jazeera. I probably look at their news feeds daily as I'm scanning what is going on with this war and other things. However, their Arab language broadcasts are a little different from their English broadcasts. And the thing that Israel is very frustrated with is that they will play Hamas interviews, Hamas talking points verbatim, and essentially providing what Israel feels is a mouthpiece or a propaganda tool for Hamas worldwide and certainly throughout the Middle East. And this has been very, very frustrating to Israel. Now, they have not shut them down before. They have allowed them to operate in Israel, and I think they just kind of hit a point where they couldn't do it anymore. And I think part of this, and no one's going to say this, But I think the breakdown of the Cairo negotiation, this could be an indicator that the negotiations really aren't going to go very far from here out, is the fact that they did this, because shutting down Al Jazeera's offices in Israel is going to very much irritate the government in Qatar. All right, so that's a risk that they are taking by doing that. It's also cutting off a channel of communication that Israel has with the Arab world, if you will. However, that channel may be skewed towards a Hamas message. It still was a way that they could communicate. So there is some risk they take from a strategic communication standpoint in doing this, from a diplomatic standpoint in doing this. But I think it shows that that they are beyond frustrated. Also, one of the things Netanyahu noted in this was he says he wasn't sure that he could get his regular cabinet and his war cabinet to agree on shutting down their offices months back when it was first discussed. And obviously from this, as you see, they did get the both cabinets to agree that it was time to shut down their offices in this regard. Now, this may, and I say this is, I can't say this is for certainty, but this may presage a decision. And certainly Israel's already said they've made a decision. They've said they picked the date, but this may presage a decision of all the other indicators we're seeing. You know, of Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, telling troops on the line down in Gaza and in Israel, be prepared. We're going in imminently into Rafah, and we're going to hit some other places in the Gaza Strip. This may presage that going on. And so they're doing what often happens in major military operations, which is you kind of turn off the news feed, if you will, because you don't want to give anything away. And so that may be part of what they're doing, is to limit the amount of what Al Jazeera would report, which essentially would be open source intelligence that could be leveraged by Iran, Hezbollah, and of course Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. So they want to kind of limit the amount of information they have, which is also putting more pressure on Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, because if something like this happens, then in their minds they're going, I think Israel's very serious about doing this big attack. And so if there is any chance of shifting their position in the negotiations, this is a calculated strategy or calculated tactic that Israel may be putting into effect.
That's a very interesting connection that I honestly didn't think about how when you talked about, but also kind of the counter to that Israel knows that Al Jazeera is out there, but also Hamas knows that Israel's now shut down Al Jazeera, that they also know what you know. So it's a very chess match kind of theory going on here. I do want to ask you just about Al Jazeera, and of course they want to continue to broadcast as well. What kind of ramifications, what can happen now in place in terms of both the legal and also political kind of minds to potentially, Al Jazeera is not going to go necessarily quietly. They want to continue to broadcast. Is there any kind of movement for them that they can get back up and running?
Well, I think what you're going to see is certainly in Qatar and then some of the other Arab capitals, there may be some statements made condemning this action by Israel, and certainly Qatar, I would expect their language to be a little bit stronger than some of the other countries, maybe. And certainly Al Jazeera has said they're going to keep trying to cover what is happening in the Gaza Strip. That's going to be a little bit circumspect, because the Gaza Strip militarily is primarily controlled by the Israeli Defense Force. I'm not quite sure functionally, operationally, how they would pull that off, because they're shut down in Israel, and Israel does control Gaza. And same is true for the West Bank, although that wasn't specifically mentioned, as some places are going to try and keep operating as well. So I don't quite know how they would be able to pull that off. Certainly for Al Jazeera, what they're going to have to do is rely on news feeds from other organizations to kind of to fill the void, if you will. And I imagine they'll be taking news feeds from other organizations and then putting in their own analysis on top of that, which could become decidedly more strident. At least certainly the Arab language version could become more strident to express certainly their frustration with the Israeli government because of this move. So I would not be surprised if one of the outcomes, and one would say, second, third order effects or unintended outcomes. In this case, I'd say kind of the predictable outcome is that you're probably going to get some negative press, if you will, from Al Jazeera about what was just done to Al Jazeera by Israel. So I would say that's something that certainly Israel understands this better than anybody, I'm sure, in terms of what the full consequences will be. So I'm sure that was part of the calculation, part of the discussions when they made the decision to. But it's something where they decide, all things being said, shut down their offices, at least temporarily.
Yeah, at least temporarily. And of course, like you said at the beginning of it, Netanyahu has said that Al Jazeera has kind of been, quote, the mouthpiece for Hamas in their country. So that is potentially the reason going into it. But there's a lot of different facets, a lot of different discussions around that. Hal, before I let you go, I do want to ask you about one more topic about ammunitions there that may have been put on hold by the United States government to Israel, just reports coming in. What do we make of that, especially knowing about this very near future potential invasion of Rafah? How significant would be a hold on shipments of weapons of ammunition to Israel?
Andy, that is an interesting story. The U.S. Reportedly, and this is coming from Israel, that the U.S. has been holding back. Congress just passed that big aid bill, which included about $26 billion worth of aid for Israel, military aid. And $10 billion of that was, or a little less than $10 billion, was for humanitarian aid going into the Gaza Strip. But the rest of it was really aimed at the defense sector within Israel. Now the U.S. has withheld shipping ammunition over. Very interesting. I don't know how long that will last. It wasn't really clear from any of the reports what the delay was in terms of duration, what it would consist of. But it is a way of communicating to Netanyahu, and I'm sure the U.S. is strongly communicating this in a variety of ways, about their concerns about the pending Rafah operation, their concerns about what could be a huge humanitarian problem, crisis, if you will, if they can't get the civilians out of there, if they can't safeguard the civilians. Right now, you have this very small geographic area that and historically had less than 300,000 people, now has somewhere between 1.3 and 1.4 million people crammed in there. And where do they go? How do they get there? Who takes care of them? How do they get food, medicine, all sorts of other things? The U.S. has said consistently they are not satisfied with what Israel has planned for that. And so one of the ways of communicating that is to say, okay, you're going to get military aid, but we're going to hold off for the time being. And that may have been to give Israel a little bit more incentive to try and come to terms with Hamas as well. Now, will this last for a week, 2 weeks, a month? I don't know. And the Biden White House right now is saying absolutely nothing about it. They won't admit they did it. The Pentagon won't admit that was held back. So we'll see how this rolls out throughout the week. I think at some point there'll probably be enough persistent questions by various media outlets as to what is going on that at some point John Kirby or someone else is going to have to address this issue as far as what it is. And of course, I would be surprised if someone says, well, if someone doesn't ask, why are we doing this? Yeah. And they're going to have to explain that too.
Yeah, some of the back channel communications, very interesting there between those two nations, the United States, the Biden administration, and Israel. Hal, you are a wealth of knowledge. Thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox to break all of this down there in this Israel-Hamas war as we near the 7-month mark. Thanks you again for joining us here on Live Now.
Thank you, Andy, and have a great rest of your weekend.
All right, you too. We'll talk again soon.